The river was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that hides behind the sound of rushing water. Fishermen along the banks were used to finding debris, branches, broken bottles, the occasional bicycle dragged down by rust. But what they found that day wasn't driftwood. It was a body, half submerged, tangled in reeds. The current had pressed the corpse against the muddy bank. A woman, young, barely in her 20s. Her skin was pale, her hair clinging to her face like seaweed. She was dressed not for swimming or hiking, but in city clothes. A black blouse, a skirt, a broken heel still strapped to one foot. Whoever she was, she hadn't come here willingly. Within hours, the quiet riverside turned into a crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, and investigators bent low over the mud, photographing every detail. But as police worked, whispers spread fast, through the fishermen, through the reporters, through the small town that fed on scandal. The woman's name would soon be revealed, Elena Marquez, a 21-year-old college student with a promising future. But what made her story explode across headlines wasn't just her youth or the brutality of her death. It was who she had been connected to. Because Elena Marquez, the girl pulled lifeless from the river, had been seen only weeks earlier on the arm of one of the most powerful men in the county, Judge William Harrington. Respected, feared, a man who had built his career on order, discipline, and a reputation so spotless it gleamed. Yet behind closed doors, his carefully constructed life was beginning to unravel. As the investigation unfolded, one question took hold of the public imagination and refused to let go. Did a powerful judge murder his lover to keep their affair buried in the shadows? Or was there someone else lurking in Elena's life? Someone far more dangerous who wanted them both destroyed? This is the story of how a secret affair spiraled into a tragedy, how power and passion collided in the most brutal way, and how, even after years of searching, the truth still floats just beneath the surface of that river. Judge William Harrington was the kind of man who carried a courtroom without raising his voice. In his early 50s, tall with silver hair combed neatly back, he embodied the image of authority. For nearly 2 decades, he had sat on the bench of the county's Superior Court, presiding over cases that shaped lives and careers. Lawyers respected him, defendants feared him. The press admired him, often calling him the moral backbone of the community. He was the kind of judge who quoted precedent from memory, who was as comfortable on the podium of a law school lecture as he was in the courtroom. At home, Harrington appeared to have everything a man could want: a sprawling house in the wealthiest neighborhood, a wife, Margaret, who came from a respected political family, 2 children in college, both following ambitious paths, one in law, the other in medicine. On the surface, it was the picture of stability. But power has a way of creating distance. Harrington's marriage had grown cold over the years. Conversations with Margaret became transactional, centered around social events, family obligations, and the facade they maintained for the outside world. Inside, there was silence. Silence that left Harrington restless, searching. Elena was 21, a junior at the local university. Bright, ambitious, with a sharp mind for political science. She came from a working-class family, her father a mechanic, her mother a nurse, and she carried herself with a mix of humility and determination. Professors described her as articulate, confident in debates, someone who didn't shrink in the face of authority. She met Judge Harrington, not in a classroom, but at a guest lecture he gave on ethics and law. Elena had asked a question that lingered in the air. How can justice be truly impartial when judges themselves are human, with desires and weaknesses like anyone else? The room had chuckled nervously. Harrington had smiled politely and given a measured answer. But afterward, he remembered her. And Elena, bold as she was, stayed behind to continue the conversation. That conversation stretched into coffee into lunch, and soon into something neither of them could admit openly. Harrington knew the risk. For a man of his stature, even the rumor of impropriety could crack the foundation of his career. Elena, too, understood the danger. Her scholarship depended on reputation, and her future career in politics would be crushed if word spread. Yet secrecy has its own intoxication. To them, it wasn't just an affair, it was escape. For Harrington, escape from the rigidity of a marriage that had turned to stone. For Elena, escape from the limitations of her world into one of influence, fine dinners, and whispered promises. But secrets don't stay secrets for long. By the spring of that year, whispers began to drift through the courthouse. A judge spotted dining with a student, a young woman climbing into a black sedan late at night, sightings near hotels outside town. For months, the rumors remained just that, rumors. No one dared confront Harrington directly. Still, behind closed doors, the judge was slipping. Staff noticed he spent more time locked in his chambers. He seemed distracted during hearings. He worked later hours, leaving Margaret to host social functions alone. And Elena, she began confiding in friends, carefully, cautiously, that she was seeing someone important. She never said his name, but the secrecy in her voice hinted at something too big to be ordinary. This was the fragile world they built, a world balanced on lies, half-truths, and stolen hours. A world that would soon come crashing down. Because by summer, Elena would vanish, and the last person confirmed to have seen her alive was Judge William Harrington. The first months of the affair felt like a stolen summer. Elena and Judge Harrington met in quiet corners of the city, always away from the courthouse, always far from campus. A small Italian restaurant 2 towns over became their refuge. A motel off the highway turned into their sanctuary. For Harrington, the thrill was dangerous, almost reckless. He had spent his entire career controlling impulses, judging others for their lack of discipline. Now he was the one sneaking glances over his shoulder, the one leaving his phone face down at dinner, the one living 2 lives. For Elena, it was intoxicating. The judge opened doors she never imagined, introducing her to expensive wine, private dinners in places where reservations were nearly impossible, rides in the sleek sedan driven by his clerk. He made her feel chosen, as if her ambition and intelligence had finally been recognized by someone who mattered. But with intimacy came cracks. Harrington grew possessive. He began asking Elena about the friends she spent time with, the professors she admired, even the classmates she texted late at night. He masked his jealousy in the language of concern, reminding her of the risks if their relationship were ever exposed. Elena in turn pushed back. She was too young, too bold to be controlled. Arguments began to pepper their meetings. He wanted secrecy. She wanted acknowledgement. She joked half serious that he should just leave his wife. Harrington never laughed. And then there was the problem of visibility. By fall, the whispers in town grew louder. A fellow student swore she saw Elena climbing into the judge's car outside a bookstore. A courthouse secretary claimed she noticed Harrington slipping out during lunch hours more frequently. Nothing provable, nothing concrete, but enough that Harrington began to feel pressure closing in. At home, Margaret noticed too. She was a political strategist in her own right, no stranger to rumors. Her questions were sharp, pointed. Why the late nights? Why the sudden phone calls you take in the garage? Why the scent of perfume that doesn't belong to me? Harrington denied everything. Margaret, whether she believed him or not, stopped pressing. Silence in their household grew thicker. For Elena, the weight of secrecy became suffocating. Her friends noticed her withdrawing. She dropped hints of being caught in something dangerous, of being unable to end it even if she wanted to. One close confidant later told investigators that Elena feared for her future, that she knew too much about someone important, but never revealed who. By November, tension had reached a breaking point. Their once passionate encounters turned into heated arguments. Elena wanted clarity. Was she just a secret, or did Harrington see a real future with her? Harrington, cornered, warned her that exposure could destroy them both. And then came the threats. A roommate recalled hearing Elena on the phone late one night, her voice shaking as she whispered, "You can't control me. I'm not afraid of you." She slammed the phone down, locked her bedroom door, and said nothing the next day. No one knew who was on the other end of that call. Some believe it was Harrington. Others suspect it was someone else entirely. Another man Elena had grown close to, Perhaps someone her age, someone who knew about the affair and resented being in the shadows. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Elena was beginning to feel trapped, and within weeks, she would disappear. It was a cold Thursday night in late November when Elena Marquez was last seen alive. That evening, she attended a small gathering at a friend's apartment near campus. According to those present, Elena seemed distracted. She checked her phone constantly, stepping out onto the balcony several times to take calls she refused to explain. When pressed, she brushed it off, saying only, "It's complicated." Around 10:30 p.m., Elena excused herself. She told her friend she had an early meeting the next morning and needed to get home, but she never returned to her dorm. Security cameras captured her walking across the university parking lot at 10:46 p.m. She wore a black blouse and skirt, the same outfit later found on her body. She carried her phone in one hand, a small handbag in the other. And then she vanished. For 2 days, no one reported her missing. It wasn't unusual for Elena to spend a night away, especially if she claimed to be with friends or studying off campus. But when she failed to show up for a scheduled presentation in class, concern began to spread. Her professors reached out. Her roommate called her parents. By the third day, her absence could no longer be explained. The missing person report was filed. Investigators began retracing her steps. Friends described her distracted behavior that night, her vague excuses, the phone calls. They provided names of people she had recently confided in, but one detail stood out. Elena had mentioned she was meeting someone important later that night. Her phone records told a story. The last call she received before disappearing came from a blocked number. The call lasted 12 minutes. After that, her phone went dark. Whispers quickly turned into accusations. Students murmured about a secret relationship. One even told detectives hesitantly that Elena had been seen in the passenger seat of a luxury sedan, a car that looked very much like the one Judge Harrington drove. When detectives approached Harrington, he denied everything. He claimed he was home with his wife that night, preparing for an upcoming case. Margaret, ever composed, supported his alibi. But investigators noticed the tension in the air, the way she looked at her husband before answering, as if weighing each word. Days turned into a week. Flyers with Elena's face plastered telephone poles, campus boards, cafe windows. Her parents gave tearful interviews on the local news, begging for information. Students held candlelight vigils. But as hope dwindled, a darker theory began to take hold. Elena hadn't simply disappeared. She had been silenced. And when her body surfaced in the river 2 weeks later, that theory became unavoidable. The call came in just after sunrise. A fisherman along the South Fork River reported what he thought was a mannequin tangled in reeds near the bank. Patrol officers arrived first, and detectives, and by the time the coroner's van pulled up, there was no doubt. It wasn't a mannequin. It was Elena Marquez. Her body was half submerged, the current pressing her against the mud. The cold water had preserved her in a chilling stillness, her black blouse and skirt clinging like a second skin. One of her heels was missing, the other snapped in half, as if she had stumbled or been dragged. The scene was grim, but what stood out most was her face. Her lips swollen, her eyes clouded, her expression frozen somewhere between fear and resignation. An autopsy followed within hours. The medical examiner's report was unsettling. Elena had water in her lungs, but the bruises on her arms suggested she had been restrained. There was evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her head, likely delivered before she entered the water. Cause of death: drowning compounded by blunt impact injury. Toxicology revealed trace amounts of alcohol and prescription sedatives in her system, enough to impair her, but not enough to explain her death. For investigators, this was no accident. This was homicide. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Local news outlets splashed her face across every broadcast. Headlines screamed, "Body of missing college student found in river," and "Murder mystery rocks quiet town." But as the story spread, so did another revelation. One investigators had quietly been piecing together. Multiple witnesses now stepped forward, linking Elena to Judge William Harrington. Students whispered that she had confided about an older man with influence. A cafe owner recalled seeing her dining with him in a booth tucked away at the back. The pieces began to form a dangerous picture. Reporters descended on the courthouse, shoving microphones in Harrington's face as he entered. His responses were curt, defensive. "I don't know this young woman. I have no comment on rumors." His tone carried the sharp edge of a man used to authority, but for the first time his control seemed to falter. Behind the scenes, detectives pushed harder. They reviewed his phone records. Most calls were scrubbed through secure lines, but one anomaly stood out: a series of late-night calls from a prepaid phone purchased under a false name. The last call from that number coincided exactly with the final 12-minute call Elena received before she vanished. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing tying him physically to the riverbank. The community split in two. Some saw Harrington as a monster hiding behind the robe, a man who abused his power until it turned deadly. Others insisted it was a witch hunt, a smear campaign against a respected judge. Through it all, one fact lingered. Elena Marquez had been alive, vibrant, ambitious, and now she was dead in the river. The only question was, who put her there? Detective Laura Chen had seen her share of high-profile cases, but this one carried a weight unlike any other. The moment Judge William Harrington's name began surfacing in witness interviews, the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a political earthquake. Behind closed doors, the police department was divided. Some officers argued they needed to tread carefully, accusing a sitting judge of murder without hard proof could destroy careers. Others believed letting his position intimidate them was a betrayal of justice itself. Detective Chen pressed forward. The first step was mapping Elena's last days: phone records, bank statements, class schedules, security cameras. A clearer picture emerged. Elena had been juggling more than one life. She was excelling academically, preparing applications for internships, but also withdrawing socially. Friends said she had grown paranoid. She deleted messages, avoided parties, and seemed constantly distracted by her phone. Then came the most chilling detail. In her dorm room, tucked inside a notebook, detectives found half-finished letters, drafts addressed to W. One read, "You can't keep pretending this doesn't exist. If you don't make a choice soon, I will. I'm not afraid of the truth." Another was shorter, almost frantic. "You said I was important to you. Prove it, or I swear I will tell them everything." The implication was undeniable. Elena was pressuring Harrington, whether for commitment, recognition, or out of desperation. She had grown tired of being a secret. But the investigation also uncovered another name: Daniel Brooks. Daniel was a fellow student, close to Elena's age. He'd been in several classes with her, and according to friends, the two had a brief romantic connection before she became entangled with Harrington. Daniel, it seemed, didn't take the rejection well. He sent her late-night messages, some pleading, others bitter. One message, sent just weeks before her disappearance, read, "If you think he's going to leave his wife for you, you're wrong. You'll regret trusting him." Suddenly, investigators had two possible suspects, one powerful, one scorned. Meanwhile, media frenzy intensified. News vans lined the courthouse steps, and protesters shouted as Harrington walked into work each morning. Some carried signs reading "Justice for Elena." Others demanded he step down until cleared of suspicion. Harrington tried to maintain his composure, but cracks were showing. He grew irritable in court, snapping at attorneys for minor infractions. Colleagues noticed his once polished demeanor slipping into paranoia. He stopped attending public functions. Margaret, his wife, was seen leaving the house alone, her face a mask of controlled humiliation. Behind the scenes, Harrington hired one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state, a man known for dismantling prosecutions piece by piece. His message to investigators was clear. If they wanted to charge a judge, they had better come with ironclad proof. But proof was slippery. Yes, the prepaid phone linked to Harrington lined up with Elena's final call, but no fingerprints tied it to him. Yes, witnesses saw them together, but none could confirm physical intimacy beyond speculation. Yes, the letter suggested pressure, But they weren't signed, and skeptics argued they could have been written about someone else entirely. And then came the most confounding piece of evidence: surveillance footage from a gas station near the river. At 11:32 p.m., the night Elena vanished, a black sedan matching Harrington's was seen pulling in. The driver's face was obscured, but detectives noted a striking detail. The passenger door opened briefly, and a figure resembling Elena stepped out, looking unsteady. The tape was grainy, the timeline plausible, but still, it wasn't conclusive. Public opinion split down the middle. To some, it was obvious. Harrington had grown desperate to silence a young woman threatening to expose him. To others, it was equally clear. Elena had been manipulated, yes, but by someone else. Maybe Daniel, maybe another figure altogether, and Harrington was simply the convenient target. Detective Chen felt the pressure from all sides. Political figures called her office, urging caution. Reporters hounded her for leaks. Elena's grieving parents demanded answers. And yet, for all the noise, one haunting truth remained. The only person who truly knew what happened that night was the one lying in the river. When the grand jury convened, the city buzzed with anticipation. Could a sitting judge truly be indicted for murder? The spectacle was unprecedented, and reporters treated it like blood in the water. Prosecutors built their case carefully. They presented the timeline: Elena's disappearance, the suspicious late-night calls, the drafts of letters found in her dorm, the surveillance footage of a black sedan by the river. They argued motive: a powerful man desperate to silence a lover threatening to expose him. They painted Harrington not as a victim of rumor, but as a predator hiding behind his robe. The defense, however, was equally relentless. They argued that every piece of evidence was circumstantial. No fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness placing Harrington at the scene of the crime. They highlighted Elena's connection to Daniel Brooks, portraying him as a jealous, unstable young man who had far more to lose. Daniel himself was subpoenaed. On the stand, he admitted to feelings for Elena, but denied harming her. His voice cracked as he described their final argument. Weeks before her death, when she told him she was involved with someone untouchable, he claimed he walked away, bitter but not violent. The prosecution leaned heavily on the gas station footage. The blurry frame showing a young woman stepping from the sedan became their centerpiece, but the defense dismantled it with ease. Grainy, inconclusive, lacking timestamps in sync with official records. It wasn't enough to convict. And then came the most shocking testimony: Margaret Harrington, the judge's wife. Composed, impeccably dressed, she testified under oath that William was home the night Elena vanished. She described their routine: dinner at 7, documents reviewed in his study, lights out by 11. Her voice was steady, unwavering. If she was lying, she never showed it. The courtroom fell silent. The prosecution tried to press, to highlight inconsistencies, but Margaret held firm. She would not betray her husband. By the time closing arguments were delivered, the jury was visibly exhausted. On one side, the image of a young woman dead in a river, her promising life stolen. On the other, the towering reputation of a judge and a defense that had shredded every thread of certainty. After 3 days of deliberation, the verdict was read: not guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elena's parents wept openly, her mother collapsing into her father's arms. Harrington, stone-faced, adjusted his tie. Margaret placed a hand gently on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. Outside, the courthouse erupted. Protesters shouted, "Justice for Elena!" Reporters swarmed Harrington as he left, demanding answers he would never give. But a trial's end doesn't always mean closure. Though acquitted, Harrington's career was shattered. He resigned from the bench within weeks, citing irreparable damage to public trust. His family retreated from public view, their once pristine image tainted forever. Rumors swirled that Margaret left him quietly, retreating to her family's estate out of state. Daniel Brooks faded into obscurity, his reputation stained by suspicion he could never fully escape. He eventually transferred schools, seeking distance from whispers that followed him everywhere. And Elena Marquez? Her name became a rallying cry. Students held marches in her memory, demanding accountability for those in power. Yet despite their efforts, the truth of her final night remained out of reach. For Detective Laura Chen, the acquittal left a hollow ache. She had believed the evidence pointed to Harrington, but she also knew the holes in the case were impossible to ignore. Justice had slipped through her fingers, like water through the reeds of the river where Elena was found. The file was closed. The case was over. At least on paper. Officially, the case of Elena Marquez ended with Judge William Harrington's acquittal. The trial transcripts gathered dust in courthouse archives, the headlines faded, and the town shifted its attention to newer scandals. But for those who knew Elena, and for those who had followed every detail, the questions never stopped. What happened during those 12 minutes on the phone, the night she disappeared? Who was driving the black sedan at the gas station? Why did her final letters feel unfinished, as if she had been interrupted before she could say more? Some believed Harrington was guilty, shielded by money, power, and a loyal wife who sacrificed truth for reputation. To them, the acquittal was not justice, but proof of how far influence could stretch. Others whispered darker theories, that Daniel Brooks, consumed by jealousy, snapped when he realized Elena was slipping away for good, that his bitterness boiled into rage, and that the shadowy phone call was his final attempt to win her back, or silence her forever. And then there were those who wondered if the truth was even stranger. Elena had confided in multiple friends that she felt watched, that someone beyond Harrington or Daniel knew her secret. Had she been caught in a triangle with more than two corners? Was there another presence in her life, one she never dared to name? Detective Laura Chen never stopped asking herself those questions. Long after the case file was stamped closed, she found herself driving past the South Fork River, replaying the timeline in her head. Sometimes she pulled over at the very spot Elena was found, watching the water curl and crash against the reeds. She wondered if the river itself knew the answers, if its silence was the final cover-up. In the years that followed, Harrington lived in quiet obscurity. He moved out of state, divorced, and faded from the public eye. Rumors swirled of heavy drinking, of angry outbursts in bars, of a man haunted by something he could never fully bury. But he never spoke Elena's name again. Daniel Brooks graduated under a cloud of suspicion, relocating to another city. His social media accounts went dark. Friends lost contact. Some claimed he reinvented himself entirely. Others said he was never the same, carrying a shadow he couldn't shake. As for Elena, her story became something larger than a crime. It was a warning whispered on campus, a story parents told their daughters when they left for college. Be careful who you trust, because power hides its sharpest teeth behind the smoothest smiles. And yet, there was one final detail that resurfaced years later, buried deep in the evidence box, a phone recovered from the reeds, waterlogged and damaged beyond repair. It had been logged, tagged, and forgotten. When a technician ran a recovery attempt, one file remained partially intact. An audio recording, muffled, distorted. Elena's voice. Only 4 words could be made out clearly, words that offered no answers, only deeper questions. Please, don't do this. The tape ended abruptly. To this day, no one knows who she was speaking to. And maybe that's the most chilling part. Because somewhere out there, whether walking free in a quiet suburb or buried beneath secrets no one dares disturb, is the person who knows exactly what happened to Elena Marquez that November night. And they've never been caught.